Just a bit of background, Rima is a psychologist by training, but she's what I would call a tech psychologist because she's working with all the beautiful technological gadgets, these fancy eye trackers and heat sensors and, everything that sort of tries to open the black box of decision making, of human decision making, by looking at the physiological and cognitive processes underlying, human behavior, which I find a really fascinating area of research. And also in her sort of free time, I guess, she's like one of the most outspoken advocates in German psychology for open science. So she's variously published on questions of making materials and publications open, on improving the culture of academia, and things that she's going to present to us now, about the working conditions of academics. So there's a wide variety of topics that she's really knowledgeable and renowned for. And it's a particular pleasure for me now to introduce her to you all, because I think that was a beautiful fit between the Open Science Working Group of GYA. So I'm not going to talk much more about that. I'll just hand over to Rima, and we have about 1 hour, including discussion. So feel free to take as much time for presenting as you like, and then we'll go into open discussion. And all of this being recorded, this. So yeah, the floor is yours, Rima.
Great. Thank you so much, Hanyo, for this very kind introduction. And the type of introduction that's making me blush for sure. I'm really happy to be here, and so thanks for the opportunity and for this chance to talk to you about some thoughts and some arguments that we've written down together with members and friends of the German Reproducibility Network on the importance of permanent employment contracts for fostering research quality and for research robustness. So I think this fits really well with the Global Young Academy as an institution because, we try to encourage systematic change, and GYA is one of these institutions that can try to pave the path for changing how we conceptualize academic work and the conditions under which we do it. I believe we have a good fit, and I hope you find this an interesting and thought-stimulating proposal. So throughout the whole presentation, my basic assumption will be that we're looking at research quality in terms of meaning doing good research. So we want to do good research, and that might mean something different depending on the research tradition that you work in, but throughout my talk, my basic assumption will be that while we focus on research quality, what we mean by that is that it requires, to some degree, open scholarship. So I'm sure that I'm preaching to the choir if I come to the open science meeting of the Global Young Academy, but I will still say that openness and transparency are the basic quality criteria that we need to reach what we can consider soundly done research. And I would say that research needs to be robust, it needs to be reproducible, and it needs to be replicable. And what exactly that means differs, of course, depending on the research tradition and school that you are working in. And of course, the list goes on. So this is good research probably also means many more things than that, right? It's not only open, but it surely needs to be many more things to be good research. But even with these basic kind of sets of criteria that I'm here treating as an assumption, we have to worry that these basic quality criteria of openness, transparency, reproducibility, and replicability themselves may often just not be met in the research that is commonly done, right? So we know from various disciplines, and I am speaking as a psychologist here, as somebody who's working in a discipline where there are issues with these quality criteria, and so we can't rely on finding these when we look at research in the wild. So while there is a surge of open scholarship, thanks largely to efforts sparked by individuals, right, and grassroots networks, open science is far from the norm. So what we as the German Reproducibility Network aim to do or aim to think about is making good research practice the norm, and doing so by not only relying on individuals and grassroots networks, but by changing systematically how research is done. So the kind of preconditions and working conditions that researchers deal with. So the need for good research practice and open scholarship, that's the basic tenet basically of the GRN, must also be reflected in institutional structures and commitments and in incentive structures. However, as I will argue now in the next 25 minutes or so, the institutional structures that we have in academia, specifically the employment conditions, are often not or not yet suitable for fostering open scholarship and for fostering with that high quality research. Actually, I'll argue that it is the case quite the contrary, that employment conditions in academia foster research that is not high quality and not open and not transparent. So what I will show you here is the central legislative act that is not only a good word if you're playing Scrabble, because it will surely earn you lots of points. But it's also the important word to know for any researcher working in Germany, the Wissenschaftszeitvertragsgesetz, that means the academic fixed-term contract law act, pardon. This is a piece of legislation that regulates how researchers can work in German academia. And what it regulates specifically, so I'm going to go into the German case just as an example here, and then I'll talk about a bit more of an international perspective. What it stipulates specifically is that to do research, you basically have 12 years in Germany working on fixed-term contracts. So that means non-permanent positions. 6 of these years are dedicated for doing a PhD, that means learning how to do research. And then an additional 6 years are dedicated for your postdoc phase, so doing research and trying to establish yourself as a person who will end up being a, let's be real, probably the only position that you could get that will allow you to stay in academic research. You would need to become a professor. So after these 12 years, you cannot, or you will not be offered fixed-term contracts anymore, but you would have to find a permanent position. And there are some exceptions to this. So if you have third-party funded projects, that doesn't count. And if you spend time abroad, and so there are a couple of exceptions, but let's focus for now on the main issue, which is that there is a built-in career end for many postdocs and other researchers working in German academia on these fixed-term contracts, because after their 12 years elapse, they will just not be able to continue their career path. So what do I mean by you can't continue this career path? I'm going to show you that in a second, but for now, let me show you how things might even get worse. So the 6 + 6 years, that's the current status. But the debate, the current policy debate is of changing this Wissenschaftszeitvertragsgesetz to a 4 + 2 year solution. And I'm going to show you why I think this is worse in just a second. Yeah? So, but this is the plan to make this period, this kind of qualification period, as they call it, even shorter. So what can you do if you've reached the end of your qualification period? Well, basically, you have 3 options. The first option is to just get a permanent contract. That's how you basically win the game of German academia. You become a professor and you will be able to stay in the research game. You'll be able to continue doing your work. The other option is to try to get by on third-party funding, so you can hope to score a permanent position at a later point in time, but use a third-party funded position to kind of tide you over. But this is a bit keeping your fingers crossed, because it's not promised that at the end of this third-party funding fixed-term contract, there will be another one for you. Yeah, it has to be one. Usually these are quite competitive. So there's no promise that there will be another third-party funded project for you waiting. And there's also, of course, no promise that you might get a permanent contract. And your third option is to just wave goodbye to academia and leave that game and find a career path elsewhere in a different industry. So this could be literal industry. So this could be working in research and development outside of academia. It could also be becoming self-employed or doing something else altogether. So these are basically at the end of your 12 years or soon to be 6 years, the options that you have. And this is, of course, not an issue that only affects very few people. Otherwise, probably the upheaval that you hear from your German colleagues wouldn't be quite as large. But actually, it affects 87% of the research staff at German research institutions, because they are employed on these fixed-term contracts. So they have a built-in career end at the end of currently a 12-year phase of building this career. So let's take a quick look at whether this is only an issue in Germany, though. So in the paper that I'm presenting today, we work together with colleagues from different nations to try to get an idea of whether this issue that there are no or few permanent positions available is a specifically German problem or not. And as you can see here, it's not just a German problem. So we compiled different puzzle pieces to what makes a stable and well-functioning academic system. And 3 of these we thought have to do with career prospects. So whether there are career paths existing beyond tenure, whether permanent positions are available at early career stages, or whether the majority of positions are permanent. So from the 87% in the German case that I just showed you, we can for sure say that the majority of positions are not permanent in Germany. It also tends to be the case that positions are tenured only at higher career stages in Germany. So you usually you end up with a full professorship, although that's if you get one. Although that's changing a bit, the landscape is shifting towards somewhat earlier opportunities to gain stable employment. And the question whether there are career paths beyond getting tenure as a full professor in Germany, it's basically non-existent at the moment. But you can see that in other nations that we collaborated with, the picture is quite different. So for instance, in Bangladesh, you see that actually the majority of positions is permanent, but there are other issues in this country in particular. I'll get to that in just a second. And in many countries in the global north, we actually see that there is a similar setup that shows a relative lack of stable career paths in academia. So this is an overview of an international perspective. So it's not just a German problem. It's very much an issue in several nations that are struggling with academic systems that provide very little stability for those people who are working in them. And I want to engage with kind of the reasoning that stands behind why these career paths are being kept in this type of unstable position. So, and again, I'm going to speak specifically about the German case because this is what I know best. And also, if you have very little nice things to say, it's better to just say them about, keep them in your own backyard. So I will continue with the German case and tell you that one of the reasons that the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research has put forward for why there should be such a fixed-term contract act in Germany as we have at the moment is that it is put into place to avoid clogging the system, as a literal quote. So the idea is that by continuously getting an influx of new research personnel, they can foster innovation. So that's the goal, to get new thinkers and fresh ideas, and that this will somehow help the system, the academic system in Germany, be more productive. And will make space for new ideas by pushing out old ideas and researchers who've not managed to score one of the very few available permanent positions. What I will argue, however, is that this is not what's happening. And instead, what is created is an extreme turnover. So this, by definition, basically guarantees that there's change in the system. But I will argue that this change in the system is actually not a beneficial type of change. So instead of promoting high research quality, as intended, for instance, by the German ministry, I will argue that instead this high turnover might actually threaten the continuity of the research engagement that takes place. So research projects often hit a dead end, right? When researchers have to drop out because their contracts have simply elapsed. And this also means that the methodological expertise that people have been building over their careers in research is simply lost. So something that takes years, often takes years to acquire, is lost when highly skilled researchers are pushed out of the academic job market. And that also means that research projects and equipment sometimes cannot be continued to be used because there's just no expert thinker who's able to use them. And at the same time, this means that there is a fresh generation of researchers who has to build up this new expertise again, and only to become then again exchanged. So in effect, that would mean that research progress is actually slowed instead of increased. And because resources are wasted, that also means that research quality suffers. So in effect, I would argue that high turnover is actually a threat to research progress and to innovation and to good research practice, rather than being a driving force. So a second argument that's often brought forth why researchers should be employed on these specific types of fixed-term contracts that, at least in the German case, are quite the departure from the regular way that employees are being treated in other industries. The second argument is often that fixed-term contracts are promoting research quality by just selecting the best researchers, just keeping the best researchers in the system, and those people who are unsuccessful at securing a permanent employment position, they're just considered as simply not the best, right? And I will argue that for that to be true, we would actually have to have good selection procedures for who are the best researchers for these few permanent positions. But on the other hand, we actually have a reality of biased selection procedures. We know that selection procedures in academia are highly problematic, and we might be selecting not for who is actually the best researcher, but who can perform well given the incentives in the system. And so that means at the moment, permanent positions are awarded based on performance metrics such as the acquired third-party funding and publications in journals with high impact factors, or something like publication-based age index, right? But when researchers are incentivized to pursue these types of goals, to pursue third-party funding, to publish in highly desirable, what we call highly desirable journals, what is incentivized is actually not genuine research progress. Or high research quality. What we incentivize by this is producing a lot of publications with results that make them publishable in mainstream research areas. So they need to be flashy or pseudo-innovative, but it disincentivizes at the same time the process of often thorough and painstaking process of corroborating and documenting in research. So in short, this means there's just no time for things that I would say count as part of good research practice. So instead of allowing us time to run replications and try to reproduce prior work, we have to produce new stuff to get it published well. And this means that this rewards work that games the system also, for instance, that type of work that uses questionable research practices. And so this means that research quality simply suffers. Yeah, so in sum, I would say that the two assumptions that are behind the idea of why fixed-term contracts are supposed to promote research quality, I find them deeply flawed. So what can we do? Because this is an unsatisfying kind of picture, right? And it's not only a German issue, but in all countries that have such unstable career paths in academia, I find this to be a problem. So what can we do to reach a more sustainable employment structure, one that offers more certainty and better career prospects for researchers so that they can actually focus on doing good research? What I'll do is I'll plug 5 thoughts for you that might help along those ways. So the first idea is that incentives in academia should actually mirror the fact that high quality research often is team research. But at the moment, because the career paths are short and first authorship in many research areas is the currency that makes a career, this just disincentivizes people and makes it unreasonable to expect that researchers will invest heavily in learning specific research skills that will not get them the first authorship. So that means long-term career perspectives in academia are needed for researchers to be able to invest in these specialized skills and to put them to use without worrying about the credit that they will get for it. High research quality requires interdisciplinary teams of researchers with different skill sets, and it requires recognizing also the merit of work that research software engineers and data stewards and theory experts are doing, as well as experimentalists and statisticians. And it's not a world for lone genius researchers, it's a world for long-term collaborative projects that are more than just the means to securing a job. So my second plug for you will be that incentives actually should promote programmatic research. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that in the current environment with a lack of permanent positions, what we are incentivized to do as researchers is to swiftly publish several small but catchy contributions, right? Because this trumps one large, carefully planned multi-study investigation. And under such a regime, that it just doesn't take into account the time that it would take to work on holistically understanding complex research questions, yeah? Or to pursue, as I called it here, programmatic research agendas, which also means testing boundary conditions, generalizability, use methods that are perhaps non-traditional in a certain field, and therefore are off the trodden path and that don't guarantee you that there is an outcome there that will be easily publishable. But when it's unclear if an investigation will be successful, that puts career paths at risk in the current regime and the current incentive system. So in effect, research progress and gaining knowledge just require more space for us to do this type of research, for us to conduct programmatic research agendas, rather than institutional incentives that require us to boost our publication counts and therefore just focus on what works for sure and get lots of this published quickly. So my third suggestion would be that incentives should promote good scientific practice. So where research projects are carried out with the goal of becoming hireable and not with the goal of gaining knowledge and research progress, the incentive system rewards quantity and not quality of the contributions that individuals make. And in such a regime, it just doesn't pay to take the time to replicate your work. It doesn't pay to make data or code or other materials openly available, or to document them, or to even reuse things that others have done. So this would mean that there is just a lack of focus on issues like robustness, replication, and transparency in the current setup, in the current incentive system. And that means that we just waste lots of resources on duplication costs for projects that simply won't work out, and for recreating materials that already exist somewhere, but they're stashed away and just unavailable for reuse. And we need to change that. Yeah? We need to change the academic landscape to reduce this end of career threat. And therefore, that means we need an increased proportion of permanent positions to support quality in research, in particular in these areas. And because open scholarship, such as providing fair data or making materials available for reuse and carrying out public replication projects, all of those are permanent tasks that should be carried out continuously. And that means that it would make sense, at least to my mind, to dedicate permanent positions to these. So for instance, that could mean dedicating permanent positions to open scholarship officers working on these tasks. A fourth suggestion is that under the extreme market pressure for the few permanent contracts available, we face a problem with education. And this is something that we should be tackling. So currently, actually, educators are just not incentivized to innovate in teaching and to focus on good didactics, to prepare thoroughly for their classes, or to even share materials that they use for teaching with the community, right? Because the current incentive system does not prioritize teaching. It prioritizes gaining publications, and teaching time basically takes away from research time that could earn you publications. So this means that open science practices in particular are, and open scholarship practices are just being ignored, or their introduction to the curricula at higher education facilities is being delayed. And that is a big issue, because when we don't represent good research practice in higher education, this means that we effectively we fall short of educating the next generation of researchers. And I believe that increasing the proportion of permanent positions would go a long way to actually secure quality in teaching, with a foreseeable, therefore, spillover effect to research quality and to fostering research knowledge and skills that can be passed to the next generation of researchers better, and therefore make the way that we do research better. And then the fifth kind of area that I think warrants addressing is that current incentive schemes reward researchers whose research output in terms of publications and citations, whose output is high. right? But by adopting such a myopic criterion of knowledge generation, this means that there are very narrow boundaries of how we ought to use our time, how researchers are supposed to spend their time. And this means that the current incentives simply fail to address important tasks that researchers also have to do, because at the moment in research, we tend to be jack of all trades. That means the tasks that I call civic duties, such as contributing to academic self-administration and committee work, and investing in high quality teaching and mentoring, taking up emerging societal needs in your research program, and contributing to science communication and to communicating with the public. All of these things are kind of hobbies. You know, when Hanyo introduced me in the beginning, he said that open science is kind of a hobby for me. And I think it's problematic that there is actually no time and there are no resources dedicated for researchers to be working on these matters. So in effect, my argument is that we need to budget better what we expect researchers to do, and we need to reserve a realistic amount of time and other resources for them to engage in these tasks, so that that they can actually be done because they need to be done. And again, increasing the proportion of permanent positions would make room for academic staff to dedicate time and creativity and care to their duties beyond such core research tasks. So with this 5-step program, basically, I'm going to dive into some more thoughts on how this could be implemented, and how academic systems could be designed to promote research quality instead of quantity as they currently do. And I think this all starts with changing how research funding is being allocated, in terms of both to what kinds of positions, because often research is being funded on project-based positions currently. And I think it needs a switch over to from fixed to permanent positions. This is where funding needs to be reallocated. I also believe that the structure of grant-based funding needs to be changed, so that there's more of an option to also convert project-based funding to opportunities to supporting permanent positions. And actually, if you're interested, there's a second publication that I've been involved in that specifically addresses the question of how we allocate research funding, so third-party funding. We ran a simulation that actually shows that if we were just to flip a coin, basically, on whether a proposal gets funded or not, this would be much fairer in terms of reducing bias compared to the traditional system of having peer review for third-party funded proposals. And it wouldn't only be reducing bias, but it would also be increasing the quality of the funded projects. So following up on this simulation that we already did, we are now working together with a funding body in Germany that fosters innovation in higher education, and they are implementing a first run of selecting initial funding applications via lottery, and then following it up with a second stage peer review process. And I hope I can keep you updated on how this goes once we get all the data. So, but given that we changed the structure of how funding is being allocated, I think that these changes would then deliver prompts for a system-wide redesign of policies, practices, and structures in the academic system. And we've broadly categorized these kind of building blocks or puzzle pieces that we need, or we think we need, to design academic systems that can promote research quality in these 3 key areas, namely stable career prospects, good research practice as the norm, and good research infrastructure. And then spilling out from there, if these kind of puzzle pieces came into place, then we think this would lead to new norms and standards to develop, which then in turn addresses these 5 suggestions or areas for improvement that I just talked to you about, such as incentivizing more team research and more programmatic research, that eventually, the system would change over to being able to better support high research quality. Again, I can show you a bit of an overview of how we think the status quo for academic systems with regard to these puzzle pieces is in different locations that we worked together with researchers from. And you can see that the picture tends to be quite different for different areas. So in the global north, it tends to be the case that the research structure is relatively well developed. But in the global south, that tends to be less so. So that is probably also one of the reasons why the majority of research output is simply produced still in the global north. But the incentivization of good research practice is beginning to develop in several places across the globe, although it's surely not fully there yet. And then you see that there are lots of puzzle pieces missing in the area of career stability. So I believe, and with this project, we would say that there is work that could be done, and these puzzle pieces basically provide areas where there could be change, and there's opportunities for improving the status quo of these puzzle pieces to build a more solid base for high quality research. And with that, I'm going to end here and just leave this with a call for action for you, which is to change the game and to change the incentives by which we play so that we can focus instead of only on research quantity and producing the next flashy publication. We can focus on doing good research and generating robust knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rima. So as a sign of a good and inspiring presentation, you already get the first question in the chat, and I'll call out Martin in a minute. I suggest that anyone who wants to ask a question use the raise hand feature. And if you ask your question, please do a brief introduction of yourself, just name and affiliation, just so our guest knows where you're coming from, because GYA is so broad as an organization. So Martin, do you want to go first?
Okay, that was my brief question, and I have some longer ones. So I'm Martin Dominic. I am a trained physicist and a practicing astronomer at the University of St. Andrews. I actually was elected member of the GYA in 2012. So I mean, you mentioned this lottery system that has been in a discussion for quite a long time, and I've always wondered whether there has been actually a study that found that a system that is based on assessment of proposals is actually performing better. Because this is pretty much the presumption of people that said, oh no, lottery, this is not the right thing to do. We really want to assess on quality. And I'm lacking of any study that actually shown that is actually doing better and it's actually fostering quality at the end.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, we know that doing peer review costs a lot of time and lots of resources of the peer reviewers involved. So even if there was an opportunity to alleviate that pressure slightly by introducing a lottery first, I think that would already go a long way to improving things. But of course, the question is whether quality suffers if we were to do this, right? And to my knowledge, there is no scientific evaluation of this at the moment. But like I try to foreshadow, I think we're working on something in that direction at the moment. And I'll keep you updated to see what comes out of it. If it's actually warranted that we spend so much time on peer review from the perspective of whether we can actually pick the best proposals, because what we do know is that there are issues involved. So if you are established in a certain field, your chances of getting more funding in that area are increased. If you're a newcomer, it's difficult for you to find footing. We also know that there are biases, for instance, gender bias and the allocation of research funding. So wouldn't it be nice if we could find a way to get the process of allocating funding better? I think it would be, and I'll keep you updated.
All right, then Steph has raised her hand.
Yeah, thank you. This was an amazing talk. I'm Steph Gerberg. I'm in a Helmholtz Center in Germany, currently a postdoc, so this really hit home. I wanted to ask you kind of the flip side of this, which is, so it seems, at least in Germany, and I think in other places, that the reason people are so hesitant to get permanent contracts is how hard it is to break those permanent contracts. And oftentimes people should have their contracts broken. This is you know, there's been cases of abuse where it's very hard to remove a tenured professor from their position, even after fraud or abuse. And so I wonder, within your sort of vision, whether the notion of permanency stays as strong as it is, or whether there are more provisions for that permanency to be terminated, and therefore make institutes less hesitant to take someone in, because they don't have to be sure, 100% sure that the person will never commit fraud, will never be abusive, will never have a scandal. And so if this were to happen, then it's possible to remove the people. It seems in Germany that this is one of the concerns. So I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting argument, because it's sort of snake biting itself in the tail. If you say that you shouldn't be hiring people for permanent positions because there might be more fraud, and already people who are being hired for the very few positions that are permanent, they do sometimes also commit fraud. So it's not like the procedures we have currently are working in any way to stop that problem. And therefore, I'm not sure why we would hold on to the system that's already not doing it. Yeah. Instead, I would argue that actually the current system makes matters worse because of two reasons. First, we are selecting people for a situation or within a situation where they face enormous pressure, right? And then once they manage to earn tenure, all of that pressure is gone, and suddenly they're performing in a totally different system. So how are we sure that they will be performing well in that system? So I would say that's another reason why we can, be pretty sure that our selection procedures are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So argument one. And argument two, under this immense pressure, people we are selecting are not being incentivized to do the best research possible. I would say that they're being incentivized to do research that can get them into the permanent position. And that is not necessarily the best research. It is research that is citable, fundable, publishable, and so on, but not necessarily good research. And therefore, I would say that the probability of walking into fraud cases might actually be increased because of questionable research practices in the current setup, and therefore changing this and giving people stable career prospects will actually go a long way to increasing research quality and to decreasing cases of fraud. So I would say, I don't really see this argument as valid. And of course, if somebody misbehaves, there should be some form of consequences for them. And debating whether that should be termination of your position, I think that's a different question. But the question that I want to focus on is that giving people a stable career path does not mean that you invite them to become a fraud. Quite on the contrary.
Oh, yeah. Just to clarify, I just mean that I think that the notion of permanency has become so large and so, like a huge, as you said, it's like a quantum leap from, most of your science experience to tenure, right? And so my question is, in making that gradual, I don't see people talking about also revising sort of that entering into tenure, what tenure means. And I think my point is, I think everything should be revised, and maybe everything should be evaluatable. Yeah. That was.
I mean, I guess something that's very much along the lines of what you're saying is that, at least in Germany, this idea that there's a very unstable career prospect is quite different from how working relationships work in basically any other industry. So for basically anywhere else that you can work, you will get a permanent position, and that doesn't mean that people suddenly stop working, because they are fireable still, and they potentially also still have incentives and internal drive to achieve something that's cool, that's great, that's interesting. I mean, I'm pretty sure many of us researchers wouldn't be in our job if we didn't have this internal drive that we wanted to actually find something out. So I think it's also surprising that often there's an argument that people just wouldn't be moving around anymore, and there's like this clogging the system idea. that if we gave researchers more permanent positions somehow, they would all just sit down at their desk and then basically retire the second that they get this permanent position. I don't think that this is what would happen. I think it would be just like in any other industry where people have stability to perform well. They will continue to perform well because they are interested in doing it, and they can still, continue mobility between different institutions. If you are doing great research and you get a better offer from somewhere else, then you might still take it and leave and move there. So I do believe that there is a lot of merit in seeing working in academia as just another job, and taking on, kind of trying on this pair of shoes, and suggesting that maybe it would be nice to also support researchers with the same rights that other workers have.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So you triggered Martin again.
Yeah, I much liked now how you connected in your discussion several topics. The open science, the situation with the employment, the situation with the research assessment, the situation with the funding, and you showed how they are interconnected. And I would like to throw in two further dimensions to that. One is abusive practices in academia, which are really fostered, by certain people having undue power, and that relates to how things are assessed, to what counts, and under what pressure people are put, in particular through non-permanent positions, and that's quite concerning. The other point actually relates to a study that we're currently doing with the GYA. We're looking at criteria for promotion to the post of professor across the world, and we looked at policies. And something that struck us was, if we look around the globe, there are different models on how the university system is organized. In some countries, universities have full autonomy. In some other countries, everything is centralized. And we see that the criteria differ depending how universities are organized. We find a bunch of disadvantages of centralizing university systems, which in fact takes away much of diversity within the system, which is actually something that gives people more opportunities, that helps to implement changes more easily. And we saw that typically in the countries, particularly in the global north, where criteria are set at a national level, there's far more emphasis on quantitative output metrics than if universities set their own policies. You find that criteria are much wider. They cover other aspects. They cover things like collaboration. They cover things like contributions to the wider community, because those are things that, if you think it from the purpose of an institution, play a higher role than just from the idea of some abstract excellence that you see in national policies. So it might be really worth thinking to which extent part of progress is also about giving institutions a much larger degree of autonomy.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, for adding these two perspectives. I think they're, of course, very tightly connected to the arguments that I've made. And I would say that revising how we select people who may remain in the academic system and deciding whether that bottleneck really needs to be quite that steep. Those would be two very important cards that we could play in just making the system better, both for the people that work in it. And this is perhaps a selfish way to think about it, but I would much prefer if research conditions were better. So for the people who work in the system, but also from the perspective of the kind of research that we do. So for knowledge generation, I believe it would just be much better if we were to rethink hiring practices, for instance. So I know, again, lots of details about the German case, where I believe the best predictor for, and this is specific for psychology, the best predictor for who will get a professorship is simply the person who has the highest count, the number of publications. So it's not even about publication quality, it's just literally the count. And I hope that this has changed a bit since this publication is it's not very, very fresh, but now what we're seeing is that there's a bit of development that, for instance, you have to at least write a commitment to open science practices that as part of your application package and so on. So we see that there's a bit of development, but I would be super interested to find out how the rest of the study that you're currently conducting is going to play out, and what criteria for hiring and promotion and so on are in academia across the world.
Just to give you one point of comparison, we're just hired a new lecturer or 2 new lecturers, and when we were shortlisting, there were 10 people sitting in the room looking at the applications. Not one of us mentioned citations.
So things are changing.
No, but I mean, you see that different institutions do things differently, and if you go away from a national system, institutions have the opportunity to do things differently, and they're doing things differently. If you look across universities in the UK, the criteria are quite different.
Yeah, but I know that there's also a lot of effort to revise hiring and promotion criteria in academia. I believe Dora is working on this research alliance that is basically focused on defining what makes good researchers. So I believe that there's lots of opportunity there to make a positive contribution, and just to make this kind of a basic principle of how we do work and research a bit better.
So I put myself on the questions list now, and I want to ask a question that's kind of devil's advocate, of course. In a sense, I wonder, the problem of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, and you want to treat academia like any other job, and I'm very much for that. I like the job security, the common tenure track positions, and so on. But I also see that in many domains of research, we do get the best people because people who are willing to suffer through these conditions tend to be very highly motivated. And I don't mean that there's a causation, right? It's a correlation. I can't even prove the causation. But it makes me wonder whether if we treat academia with all the privilege that comes with it, the flexibility, the international outlook and everything, as an ordinary job that anyone can get, then wouldn't we make it too attractive for people who are not really motivated to do good research, but just to have a good life?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Hanyo, and I couldn't object more. So let me try to outline why I think that this view is one that I would object to. So you said that we select the academic working environment as really productive and highly attractive, and that means it might just, if we just also give people permanent positions, it might just be too good. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's rather the case that we are selecting people who can afford to sit out the pressure, and we're selecting people who have the time and the resources to be patient and hope for and take this gamble for a permanent position. What we are not selecting is people who have, for instance, care work to do. We're not supporting people from marginalized groups, people who just can't afford the flexibility of moving abroad for a couple of years while you wait for a position to open up in your field that you can scoop up. So I think we are not selecting the best people to do this job, but we are selecting the people who are able to play the game that the incentives are currently making us play. And therefore, I don't think that things are like super cozy in academia. So that it would be, if we gave people a permanent position as a cherry on top, this would just mean that other industries wouldn't be finding anybody to continue working for them. I believe actually in many areas of research, it's quite the opposite picture, that people are largely becoming unwilling to continue working in academia because the way that this work is done is just not attractive. And this also depends a lot on the kinds of contracts that you're being offered. So I know, for instance, that there are huge differences in the remuneration that PhD students get in Germany, depending on the subject that they study. So if you are working in theology or history, you're happy to work on a 50% contract, and that's on E13 scale, but you get bumped up to a full contract and a higher level of pay if you are working in engineering. So depending on how attractive the outside option is, basically, we already see that people just don't want to put up with the working conditions in academia. So again, this is where we lose excellent thinkers too, who then don't work in academia, don't work in research, and therefore, well, perhaps they don't work in publicly funded research, just in industry. So this means that, I think we're losing a lot of potential for generating knowledge, for making research progress, and creating working conditions where this is not so, to my mind, would be worth it.
Okay, thanks. Steph?
I also kind of wanted to add 2 points. I don't think that the current system, at least in Germany, selects for the best scientists or the best teachers. Yeah, so it selects for the people who play the game the best. And I don't think that that's the goal, right? In addition to also, leaking out people according to their life circumstance, I don't think it selects for good teachers at all. And there's really no, and that's, a big part of the purpose of academics, right? To teach. And the other thing that I think that I've been thinking of a lot lately, is that the age of permanency, the average age of permanency in Germany varies terribly. And that's, kind of baked into the system that allows, as Rima was saying so well, that allows for all of these biases to take hold. But I think if you were to look at the age of permanency for different demographics in Germany, you would see really stark differences. And I think that this is super problematic, specifically because we don't have anything intermediate, right? So you have, like, a very common situation is women of, and I don't like to bring childbearing into the case, because I think that gender equality is already a problem before even a woman decides or not to have children. But even, biologically, right? All of this is happening in the years where a woman might want maternity leave, right? And making sure that the pregnancy ends at a time where you still qualify for maternity leave and you're not between contracts is stress that I don't think should be legal, right? And it's systematic. And it does disproportionately affect women. And so I think that all of these things, when the system is getting revised, is something that really should be considered, like, very head on. And I don't think these things are considered head on at the moment, but it's really nice to hear Rima give her her whole overview, because it ties things together. Yeah, so thank you.
So I see one more thing in the chat. Sorry, I'm just trying to read. Oh, that was Martin. Okay, Martin, do you want to say one more thing?
No, it's just a comment on the quality of academics. I know lots of examples. I see people who essentially got their job because they were the best in selling hot air.
Okay, that's a very sad comment to end the hour on. So
Yeah, maybe I can offer a last perspective to kind of get us away from this this sadness and despair and into rather a mode of action. Because so I was actually really excited about the invitation to speak with you at the Global Young Academy, because I think this is the perfect place to help advocate not only from a position of weakness, which is basically what I'm doing. I'm sitting in a fixed-term contract position with my various privileges, but also memberships to groups that are not necessarily playing out in the top positions in academia. So for me to argue that things need to be different always has kind of the feeling that it's maybe she's just arguing for her own case. But I don't believe that is so. And I believe it takes advocacy from systematic and institutional friends and collaborators to make this point clear. So I hope that you found my arguments convincing today, and then this will be a perspective that you can take up with the Global Young Academy and bring towards the point where something can actually change in the system for the benefit of those who are working in it.
Okay, that's a very, very nice note to end on. If there are no more questions, I think we had about 2 more minutes, but I'm not going to stress the time if there's no one wanting to ask a question. So let me thank again our speaker, Rima. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
For letting us have this room for these important ideas. And now to everyone, Steph, do you want to make an announcement for the next First Friday?
Yeah.
Not already
Yeah,
right, so.
absolutely. So next month we'll be meeting a speaker from PLOS, who's actually going to tell us about the open science indicators data sets that they have, which is an open data set that they've developed using all of their research to sort of really allow people to start reevaluating empirically what open research is with all of the data that they've collected. So please join us.
Thank you very much, and bye to everyone. Have a great weekend.